I just want to welcome everyone and say thank you for coming. It's amazing to be invited. I'm always honored that Freda asks me to do this. We got to do it last year at the beginning of the year. And it was kind of a chance for me to go into material in a way that I don't normally. On Sundays when I speak, our service is 10:30, and then I get a sort of like a 15-20 minute window in the middle of it. And in some ways, that's a powerful way to talk. It's become kind of the TED Talk style of doing things. But there's something else you can accomplish when you have a bigger time frame. Now, I am not planning on talking for a full 2.5 hours, or 2 hours, or whatever it was listed as. I just care too much about you to do that. But I'm going to shoot for something around an hour and a half-ish. And we may actually pause because there were some community members who requested that we video this, and Super Doug from our community is videoing it. So if he needs to change the tape or something,
now I'm Super Doug.
Stretch our legs and continue. And then certainly we'll have time for questions. And I think that's good enough. Does that make sense? Okay. Anyone have any urgent questions before we get rolling? Oh, yes. Oh, very good question. If someone has a burning question while I'm speaking, please interrupt. Because I don't have a plan, so you're not interrupting anything. Okay? Now, if you keep interrupting with a question, I might ignore you, but yeah, if you have a question, just shout out. My wife has a question? No, she's just taking a picture. Some people may want to know about why I have this shirt on. I'll explain that later. So let's start by stopping, which I think is the best way to do these things. I'm going to invite you to close your eyes.
Just one over would be better.
Put down anything unnecessary in your physical, mental, or emotional possession. I'm going to invite you to take a deep breath in. I'm going to invite you to hold your breath a moment so that you can pay attention to where you're holding tension, tightness, stress, and then breathe out through your mouth. Long and slowly exaggerate your exhale. And then continue that a few more times. So you take a big deep breath in. Ideally, you're drawing it down into your belly, so you're not puffing out your chest when you breathe in. You hold it a moment, check in, see how it feels, see how you're doing, and then let it all go. Just breathe out. Long and slowly. When you feel you've received enough from this deep inhale, the hold, and the long exhale, I'm going to invite you to shift your breathing so that it comes in through your nose, down into your belly, and then a long, soft exhale. But you're going to do it as gently as you can. So it's a soft breath in, a quiet breath in. And a soft exhale, a soft, extended breath out. As you pay attention to the softness, the quietness of your own breath, you'll notice how it takes you to a new place. Feel your shoulders drop, the muscles in your face relax, and your mind wants to open. Soft breath, I invite you simply to hold your awareness open in a loving way so that you explore and appreciate appreciate whatever you're experiencing in this moment. If it's the sound of someone near you, if it's a car outside, if it's a thought that comes and goes, even a pain in your body. Imagine what it would be like if you could hold that with a sacred awareness, the awareness of Spirit itself. How might God perceive God's own creation? The sounds of footsteps, voices, like the sound of your own child playing in the backyard, warming your heart, reminding you that you are home. And imagine for a moment that as you breathe in, you are not just receiving breath, oxygen, you are taking in energy. The energy of life that is ever present. Breathe it in. Maybe you can even visualize it. Is it a color? Is it a light? Is it sparkling? What does it feel like as you drink this energy in? It nestles down in your belly and radiates out. What does it feel like? What might it feel like to be a radiant being of light? So, to begin, I should tell you that I was invited by Freda a while ago. I thought a lot about what I wanted to share, because this is kind of a special time, and you're a special group, and I don't send it to everybody. And the interesting thing was that I have this funny, well, I'm going to tell you a lot about myself today, because I think it's the most effective way to talk about what we're talking about. And I found myself thinking maybe a little too rationally, a little too objectively. You know, what are the 7 most important states of consciousness? What are the 7 most impactful super states of awareness that mystics and spiritual teachers have experienced over time? And I have a PhD in comparative religion, so I start going through my little Rolodex of mystics, and well, what was it like for St. John of the Cross? And what was it like for Black Elk? And what was it like for, going through the list? And at some point, I had a moment, you might call it a spiritual experience. Well, it was. I'm not going to tell you what happened. And suddenly I got, that feeling. Some of you call it a message, or you say you heard a voice, or you felt guidance, or whatever it was. But it was a feeling about what I was going to share. And I noticed that I had to overcome some of my own human fears about sharing what I wanted, or was feeling I needed to share, because it always seemed to me that things were just somehow more valuable if couched in a language of science, academics, and proof. But we're going to throw that away today. I will say that all the things that I'm going to talk about today can be studied through the lens of science, through the lens of medicine, and have been. There's a tremendous amount of material in the world that's been written about altered states of consciousness, mysticism, what is the nature of consciousness, what is the nature of the mind, what qualifies as a mystical experience, what doesn't, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, dreams, visions, seeing aliens, seeing gnomes, hearing the voice of God, feeling Jesus awaken in your heart. There are literally thousands of types of non-ordinary states and experiences. And if you want to look that stuff up, I can, send me a note, and I'll give you all kinds of books to read and all kinds of websites to go to, and that's fine. But what I decided I was going to share today was my own story and my most favorite spiritual states. In other words, the states that literally, by virtue of having them alone, changed my life. In other words, I didn't have to analyze them. I didn't have to go to a therapist. I didn't even need to go to a workshop to achieve them. They were in themselves self-contained and radically changing. And what you'll find as we go through the ones that I've chosen is that, first of all, it starts to articulate a kind of cartography or architecture, a map of our universe, a map of our spiritual universe. More so, you're going to find that what all of this is pointing us towards are a few very simple and essential lessons if you consider yourself someone interested in awakening or the spiritual path. And I will make those lessons abundantly clear at the end. And you don't need to write this stuff down, because I am not going to talk about all these things, and this is just to say there's a bunch of stuff that can happen to us. So if you're making notes, bunch of stuff. So the mindset that I would like you to kind of embrace for the remainder of our time together is something, and I know this is kind of weird, but this is just the only metaphor I've got. I'm going to invite you to be a little bit of a spiritual pirate with me. And I love the metaphor of pirates. I could do a whole month-long series on pirates. I'm not going to start today, don't worry. Some people roll their eyes and some people get excited. But the point is this, what I'm asking you to do that is sort of pirating is, at least for this period of time, try to be exceptionally present. Try to suspend all your belief and endorsement of rules. And consider what is at the heart, the treasure of your spiritual path, and that nothing else matters. Not religion, not culture, not family, not being nice to people, not your upbringing, not morals, not ethics, nothing. Or you could just say, if you don't like the metaphor of pirate, be a scientist. It's kind of the same thing. It means stay open to whatever evidence is given, and then see if it works, see if it fits. But I like the metaphor of pirate more than scientist, because for most of us, the idea of being open-minded is actually not a simple affair. You need to be fierce. You need to be, in some cases, aggressive. You need to be passionate and willing to say you don't know. You're willing to say you'll try anything. You're willing to say you'll consider anything. And what you'll find is that this little metaphor is going to appear again and again as we go through the talk. I wish there were another one, but that's just the one I've got. So, we're going to start with a little background before I get into some stories. So, here's what I realized recently. I don't know if it's sort of weird or risky to talk like this, but this is just what I'm going to do. I have to admit that having spontaneous spiritual experiences is just something natural to me. I don't think it's natural to everyone in the same way. I think every human being has spiritual experiences. I think everyone experiences spiritual states. I think everyone experiences the presence of Spirit or God without exception. I don't think we all have the same language. I don't think we all recognize it the same. But I think we are all experiencing the spiritual world, always. In fact, I think that energy is the first thing that most of us experience in any given moment. When you meet someone, you go somewhere new, you make a decision, energy is the first thing that registers. But having said that, there's this whole other circus of spiritual experience, which just started coming into my reality when I was a kid. And I'd say it probably started when I was quite young. I can think of weird things that I thought about or happened when I was 6, but I don't think it's fair to say that I was conscious of any of it till I was about 10. And from the time I was 10 until now, I would say that I've had a pretty unusual tour of altered states in the spiritual world. Now, having said that, I don't mean that I call myself a shaman, a mystic, a medium, because I don't think I'm any of those things. But I will say that for one reason or another, I've had the opportunity to glimpse the world of those people. And kind of just like stages or, episodes. And then it goes away. And then, it might never happen again. So having said that, I want to clarify some things I'm not going to talk about. So, having experiences of seeing with my own eyes fairies, gnomes, divine beings, and angels, or ghosts, and angels or UFOs never changed my life radically. So I'm trying to set up some qualifiers here. I have actually seen a fairy with my own 2 eyes. I could not believe it. I never thought I was going to see that. And I never frankly wanted to. I wasn't like fairy hunting. I was just driving in a car one day with a friend. I was actually living in Mexico at the time. And I looked out the window and all I can tell you, I was broad daylight. I had not been drinking. And I saw a little green woman with wings flying. Now, interestingly, I will make a quick side note. If you Google green fairy, this is like the least X-rated picture I could find. I mean, I don't know why people want fairies to be like little Barbie dolls with wings, but that was not what she looked like. She looked something more like this, although not as sultry or provocative. That was genuinely like, shake my head, rub my eyes, did I really just see that? Other sorts of experiences like seeing this little guy, which interestingly, my brother, who is, open to these things, but not quite as fixated on them as me, has also seen the same little fellow. We have a place in the wilderness in Canada, and we've described him to each other. We're like, oh my God, it's one of the little people. But again, interesting, but like not super life-changing. Just like, saw a little person. Ghosts. I never thought I would see ghosts, but I definitely have seen some ghosts. In other words, the ephemeral, energetic bodies of dead people. Okay? So that means like, one day I was talking to a friend of mine, she said, describe him, and it turned out it was her grandfather. So stuff like that's happened, but it doesn't happen all the time. Like, believe me, it's been a long, well, I shouldn't say that actually. In this building, I've seen a few things. You know you're here? Anyway, so, but ghosts, I don't know, I'm just saying for me, it's nice, it's curious, it's interesting, but it didn't change my fundamental place in the universe. Okay, so some imprint of consciousness in the body survives. I can go back to being stressed out, worried, controlling, and so on. And even though I was never abducted by aliens to my knowledge, I was going to say having not grown up in Kansas, I've definitely seen some of those weird lights in the sky. And I even had this one moment that was extremely bizarre, where I was in this wilderness place in Canada once again. And again, no drugs, no drinking. There was this brilliant orb of light shining over an island in the distance. And I was like, oh my God, am I seeing aliens? This is so crazy. And then I sat there and I'm kind of like, okay, if you're really there, give me a sign. And the light went. And then I thought, oh shit. Which was true. Did I really see a light, or did I just ruin it, or like what happened? And then it came back on. And this whole thing happened, and all I have to say is it was interesting, it was cool, but didn't really really change much for me. And this is important because for me, I like to connect this spiritual path of ours to something that makes a difference. Like, I don't think awakening to our spiritual nature is just for its own gratification. I believe it's for our own transformation. A few other things that didn't help, I'm going to just throw up there just so you can get a quick sense of how weird I am. Like super sort of psychedelic visions in sleep or dream or meditation or other settings, you know, I don't think they really did much. You know, lights and colors, in other words. So if you do a guided imagery, if you do a deep visualization, if you do a meditation, sometimes you can see, you know, a little bit of a light show. And that's kind of interesting, but so what? With all due respect, I have to say, like many people probably here, I have been very blessed to feel that I was once in the presence of Jesus. And it's an incredible experience, or at least mine was. I'm not saying it's typical of everyone's. Abounding love, extraordinary presence. But I didn't become Christian. And maybe because of the nature of the experience, it didn't really, the main thing it changed was just like, I was like, oh my gosh, Jesus is so real. And that was kind of the takeaway. Now, I have also experienced, fortunately, with great blessing, to witness miracles. And that has not been in my hands, but, you know, in ceremonial settings or spiritual settings or at the hands of other healers, things quite literally impossible. Probably the most significant of which was a woman who came to see my mentor, who actually happens to be the fellow in the last photo. That was the younger photo of him. And I know Althea people are like, that's what he looks like? Yes, that's what he looks like. That's what he used to look like. Anyway, there was a woman with an advanced stage cancer that had come for help and healing with him. And we had gone into a sweat lodge and we had prayed and made ceremonies for her over 2 days. And she went back to her doctor the next week. And it was actually absolutely gone. Now, I'm not saying that happens all the time. Obviously it doesn't, or this guy would have a very busy sweat lodge. But the point is that amazing things can happen, and I put his picture up because he and I will often visit each other in dreams. And I will have dreams about him and contact him, and it will often connect to things going on in his real world. And that's super cool. But that didn't really change my life either. That's how stubborn I am. Okay, we're going to move on in a second, but again, I'm trying to be clear of the variety of experiences, what is transformative and what is not. I also want to be clear, I never died and went to the other side, and I was never possessed. Although I frequently look like that. Like in the morning. Also, it's important to note that because I had these experiences starting at such a young age, I was very resistant to ever trying drugs or alcohol as a teenager or in my 20s even. You know, I mean, I might have a glass of wine maybe with my family on a special occasion, but I had this very strong feeling that whatever weird stuff was going on up here, or whatever messed up wiring I had, I wanted to leave it just the way it was. I didn't want to change anything. I wanted a chance for this stuff to keep happening. And I'll tell you honestly, although we have to be pirates, and I was not a pirate at the time, for most of my life until recently, I also had a great judgmental quality about how people achieve spiritual states. Do you know what I mean? Like, oh, well, if they felt they were close to their grandmother, but they were drinking, it didn't count. Or if he felt he saw the fabric of the universe, but he was doing mushrooms, that was cheating. I don't know. I don't know that I feel quite the same anymore. But I will just tell you that for the bulk of my life until very recently, I was very close-minded about those things. And all this stuff just happened. So no, I was not like Cheech and Chong. I just loved looking at images of Cheech and Chong. That was very funny last night. And no, I was never part of a wild hippie cult. In fact, I should make a note that my mentor, who in my life, in this case, happens to be Native American, was actually very much against drugs and alcohol. It was not a part of the lifestyle in his spiritual community or in the circle that we were a part of. So that's worth noting. The other thing that's worth noting is maybe a few things about what helped, but really there's probably only a couple things. So it helped that I got to travel. I really do think that being in a family that was open-minded and then having the opportunity to see different cultures and worlds physically at some level predisposed me to being open to different worlds internally. Do you see what I'm saying? In other words, if you don't want to see something, it's typically hard to see it. And if you're open to seeing things, you'll see all kinds of stuff. It helped to study. I mean, I did a PhD, I did all kinds of other training and different modalities of healing and energy work and chaplaincy and counseling and so on. So study helped. But I would say what it really helped was it helped me ground the experiences, contextualize them, make sense of them. But I wouldn't say that going to like whatever it was, 10 years of university or 11 actually gave me a spiritual experience. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, I might have hallucinated in a class or two, passed out during my logic classes, but you know, that's the extent of it. I will say that learning about energy healing and energy work was very important for me, and actually I do recommend it for anyone and everyone. Find some energy healing modality or path to explore, learn, and try. Why? Because there's a lot of things going on when you learn about energy work, one of which is learning to be sensitive to energy. And even if you never practice as a, quote, healer, or therapeutic touch practitioner, or Reiki practitioner, or quantum touch practitioner, or reconnection healer, you know, all this stuff. What it does is it just opens your mind. It sensitizes you, and it gives you the chance to play with a lens and a dimension of our world. The other thing that I will add, though, and these are the last two pictures, these are just visual cues for me for stuff to talk about, is the power of meditation and the power of dedication. So meditation is embodied by the woman in the meditative pose. I'm not super fixated on what type of meditation you do, but I do recommend carving out time as frequently as possible to be with your awareness. I'm not even going to say be with your mind, but to be with your awareness. In other words, you know, well, there's a funny old saying, God can't visit you if you're not home. Did you kind of get that? It's supposed to be kind of a funny thing. But the idea is that we have to create the conditions for these experiences to happen. Because just waiting for them, or just reading about them, to my knowledge, generally is not a reliable way of inducing them. The other thing, though, I said about dedication is a picture of the Bushmen in the Kalahari, and I was fortunate to spend some time there, and this was a photo of a trance dance, or what we call the trance dance. But I think that what happened in my experience in Africa when I studied there, and I still go back continuously, well, I'll tell you a quick interesting story, altered state specific. So one day I actually brought one of my two mentors from Africa to the United States. And this was at a conference at Big Bear, California. Anyone ever heard of Big Bear, California? And it was a gathering of world indigenous spiritual healers. And they came from New Zealand and the Amazon and different parts of Africa and North America and on and on and on and on. And this was his first time ever being out of southern Africa. He grew up in a village. His name is Ramaliba, Chivengwa Ramaliba. And Ramaliba is an extraordinary person who I hope you get to meet one day. He actually just emailed me yesterday and said he has a burning feeling to come visit here. And I said, well, that's coincidence because I have a burning hole in my wallet, so he won't be coming here. But anyway, so he came for the first time, and he was there a couple days early before the event started. And when he woke up, he came and saw me in my little, we were all like it was like a summer camp setting. And he knocked on my little cabin door, and he said, oh, he's a very big man, which is part of what makes him funny. So the funny thing about Ramaliba, just to give you a picture, he's very big, huge stature, very, very dark skinned. He likes to wear suit jackets because he's a traditional healer. And he sees, like, in magazines that this is what Western doctors dress like. And despite his massive stature and incredibly insane, totally 2,000-year-ago brain, this guy does not think like anybody I've ever met, he kind of acts just like a big kid. He's very playful and very silly. And when he laughs, he sounds like Ernie from Sesame Street. So he said to me, God, I must talk to you. I think I saw something last night. He said, I don't understand. And he went on to say that when he woke up in the morning, he remembered a strange dream. And that his ancestors, the spirits that traveled with him, had gone and inspected the souls of all the other healers at the event. And they had come back to him in the morning to report what they saw. And he said, what they told me is that many of these healers have not finished their steps. That's what they call them. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he said, well, how is this possible? They told me that they haven't finished their training, their initiation, that there are people here that are still wounded, that are still making shit up as they go. Is that possible in America? And I said, oh, Ramaliba, that's what we do. That's what we specialize in. So the point being that, you know, in our older traditions, and by that I mean all of our older traditions, the idea was that spirituality wasn't something you just did on your own, and when you felt like it, and as it suited you. It was something that you really committed to and you worked on. And you had a teacher, and you had a path, and you had a plan, and you worked it. And so I will say that one of the things that helped me was certainly my involvement with a very specific community and a very specific teacher. Now, it happened to be Native American, but that doesn't really matter. It could be Hindu, it could be Jewish. I mean, I am Jewish. It could be Christian, it could be Muslim. The point was that there was someone in my life who was moving me forward constantly, challenging me whenever I got comfortable. Whenever I thought I knew something, he made me feel like I knew nothing. Whenever I felt like I got somewhere, he made me feel like I was nowhere. But he perpetually loved me and gave me a container to continue the journey. And what kind of a disservice do we do for people when we constantly affirm? Now, you're going to be shocked, but remember, this is now a different way. When we constantly affirm, you know, you're fine just the way you are. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, that's our evolution. We have socially evolved in this country to be able to say, I'm okay, you're okay, everyone is perfect the way they are. That's the great spiritual message. But you know what? In some way that's true, and in some way that is totally not true. Let's face it. If he said to me when I showed up, hey man, your stress, your self-obsession, your egoism, it's fine with me. Keep it up. What kind of a teacher would that have been? Right? When you go to a university class or a training of any kind, does the teacher say you're going to learn nothing here? We will no longer test you. You can sit around for the next 3 months and everyone's going to get an A. No, what they say is there's something really special I have to share with you. And it's going to take some work, it's going to take some time, it's going to take some effort. I'm going to test you, you're not all going to do well. But this is really important stuff, and I'm glad you're here with me to take the journey. That's what my teacher said. Now, yes, on a spiritual level, what he communicated energetically was that I am lovable and acceptable in every moment, no matter what. And that is true of every one of you also. But that is not the mindset for taking on a challenge. It's not the mindset for raising a family, building a business, overcoming an addiction, healing a wound. You need commitment, dedication, willingness. And I'll tell you the single most significant thing that brought all these experiences into my world, and we haven't talked about the really wild ones yet, was absolute single-pointed focus. Now, it might sound crazy, and I know this isn't for everyone, but I will tell you, from the time I was 12 to the time I was 18, I was focused on one thing and one thing only. And that was, if there is a God, then that God can come to me directly, just as it has come to these others over time. I want to know directly. I don't want to think it. I don't want to wish it. I don't want to read about it. And this wasn't a conversation between me and other people, like, God better come see me. This was like a conversation between me and God, me and Spirit. Every day of my life, for all those teenage years. Where are you? When are you coming? I'm here. I'm waiting. I'm listening. I'm available. Where are you? I'm waiting. I'm listening. I'm available every single day. Every day. This is the passion people bring to starting businesses, finding loved ones, getting rich. But do we bring this passion to the divine? And I'm going to tell you a story of what happened at the end of that obsessive thinking. Because at this point, some of you are kind of like, yeah, we're on track, Jonathan. And some of you are thinking, Jonathan's getting, like, maybe he should have seen a doctor when he was young. But I will tell you that profound awakening is not a part-time job. And if you listen to any great master or teacher who is alive today, they will tell you it is their sole focus. And everything else around it, all the human activities around it, are just sort of like the stuff we do until we die. I will say that even though I've shared all these grand stories, and I'm about to share 9 whoppers, I'm not trying to say this to set up some kind of an understanding about me. So I'm not here to say, oh, I'm special. I'm trying to say that folks like us can have these experiences. Do you see what I mean? I am also not, and frequently uncomfortable with taking any kind of formal spiritual title, but I don't mind this kind of pirate motif, because my passion remains the same, which is to know as deeply as possible the truth of my spiritual nature while I'm in this body, until the day I die. And at this point, it's clear to me that it takes a very radical mindset to be willing to sacrifice anything, to be willing to do anything, to be willing to try anything. Now, qualifying note, listen to the word, to be willing to do, sacrifice, try. The key word is? Willing. Do you know what the key word was? Willing. I tricked you. The key word is willing. And that's at the very beginning of the Old Testament. Right? I mean, God asks Abraham to sacrifice his own son. That is crazy. but there's a profound message. And the message is, I mean, think about it. We get all moral about this stuff. What kind of a God would ask for someone to kill his own son? That wasn't the point. The point was that he felt God's presence so truly, so clearly, so powerfully, and understood it as the design, fabric, and creator of the universe. What else could he do but consider it? And then, of course, God was like, just kidding. Just want to make sure we're on track. Willingness. And it resurfaces again and again. And the life of Jesus, for those of you that come from that tradition, I mean, wow, that is the message, that nothing is real but the world of spirit. Life, death, persecution, being loved, it's all equal. It's all equal. Willingness is this extraordinary key. And that means, okay, and that means we have to be willing to lose who we think we are, what we thought was comfortable. That's the pirate message. To leave the shore, to face the unknown, to be courageous in the face of an unbelievable adventure. So, we are now going to transfer into the conversation about these 9 extraordinary states. And I know if you saw the poster or the flyer, it said 7. But I had like 14, and I cut as many out as I could. I don't know. So maybe at the end of today, you know, somebody going to come up later and say, well, of your 9, I think you really only needed 5. Well, that's fine. I'll take the feedback when I'm done. Now, before we get there, Doug needs a little break from the camera. I think that is like the funniest thing. I absolutely feel human a lot. It's a very powerful vehicle. I feel its urges, its cravings. I feel its sadness. I feel its wanting. I feel its pain. I feel its longing. I feel its love. Wow. Like this is the coolest car I've ever driven. But having said that, and been very clear that it's been a long time since I actually thought I was a person, it is humanness itself, this experience that delivers the most profound experiences. As profound as any interdimensional experience. And it came from a time of feeling very, very human. Super vulnerable. People in our center have heard this story, so I'm not going to go into great detail. But I had a major life change, which I always used to be so cynical about spiritual teachers who said, oh, my life was great, and then it was terrible, and then I realized everything. And, it was like a time where I went through a divorce. It started off mutual, but ended up just kind of ugly. Time where, through that process, like the most precious person in the world to me at the time was my son, and in that nasty process there were like threats of moving to another country. I had given up my career and growing success and all these things that I was ensconced in here to move to another country to help build a business for someone who I found out was royally screwing me, and that I was going to leave destitute instead of wealthy. I mean, I just hit that moment where it was like, dang, no matter what I believe or what I teach or how spiritual I think I am, this universe is relentless. This planet is indifferent. And so I dug deep to reconnect with love, with spirit in the midst of this trial. And then I could really understand the human condition, which is, if you're down, or I'll say for myself, if I'm down and I need to get up, if I'm down and fading away, if I'm at a loss, sense that to really experience that life exists in a design with so many of the rules we've assigned to it are just not true. Good things happen to good people. If I live a spiritual life, I'll live a long life. All that stuff, I don't know what that's about. I don't know where that came from. This is not true. I know amazing people that died young. I know amazing people that have worked hard and dedicated themselves to manifesting things, and they are struggling to pay the rent. That's just the reality of the human dimension. It's unpredictable, it's difficult, and a lot of what we think is true is not. So that was what created that shift. And then catapulted me personally into a more deeper embrace of the non-human consciousness. And actually, I made it my healing practice at that time to dwell in my altered state, however possible, as often as possible. Most of it, fortunately, so you don't have to cry for me, but I was living near the ocean. It was beautiful. So, I mean, that was my greatest bliss. It was just to go and be altered by the sea. But I did try other things for the first time. Really tried other things. I'm not going to go into what they were specifically, but I'll just say it's legal in Colorado. And the other thing was I finally lightened up and actually started to have a drink at a party, and I discovered I love tequila. Is that helpful? Okay. So great question. And it all started like this. It just started. Oh, wait a second. Did you record that then?
Yeah.
Anyway, that's fine. I don't really care. But it all started like this. Literally, I saw this photo and I was like, oh my God, that's what it was like. It was just a kid that was allowed to go and be in nature by himself. And when I went, I felt like I was in something. And so that was the first experience that really, really shifted my consciousness, like shift number one. And some of you will really relate to what I'm talking about. I'm expecting that everyone in this room will relate to at least one, or maybe many of the next 9 images. The first was what I call the experience of divine presence. Now, technically and academically, what I'm speaking about is the presence of an energy in the world that is not of the world. That is a distinct category of mystical encounter. It is different than experiencing the world as divine. We're going to get there. But this is the feeling that there is an energy like air itself flowing around things, between things, flooding our universe. And in those moments, it's almost like moving through water. You sense something tangible, though subtle, that is not of the material world. And yet, you know it exists. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on all of them. But that was the first one. And that's when I started getting curious. So that started literally in a forest that looked a lot like this in Lake of the Woods, Canada, when I was about 10. I was like, what is going on? And what is this thing? Like, I felt like I could see it, although I couldn't see it. I could, sense it. And then as I got a little older, in fact, what happened was when I was 12, my sister was in a class in which she was studying, my sister's quite a bit older than me, she was studying Nietzsche. She left this book of Nietzsche on the, I remember the moment, left it on a stool in a cabin, our family's place in the woods. And I remember picking it up with a picture of Nietzsche, or the Zarathustra on the cover, so spoke Zoroaster. And I remember picking up and started flipping through it. And I started like, oh my gosh, this guy's talking about what I'm seeing. I started to read the introduction, which was about mysticism and about the misunderstanding of Nietzsche. And as I read the introduction about mysticism, I started to read about the Upanishads and William Blake. And there was that passage passage about seeing eternity in a flower and infinity in a grain of sand, you know that one? And I was like, oh, someone else knows about this. What started to unfold from there as I grew more comfortable, and I have to say, that was not something I could turn on or off, it just was happening. It was just, I don't know when it was just available, whenever it was quiet enough or alone enough. But I know that some of you have felt this in the Rocky Mountains or in your backyard, you've had those moments. What started to unfold, though, was something more integrated. And it was as though the world itself were coming alive, like alive. And this will sound cliche, but it's the only way I can describe it. It was like trees were speaking, birds were speaking. Everything was a mythical story pointing towards the truth. If birds flew over, I would count how many and what direction. If the trees were moving gently, I would notice how that was an answer to a question I was holding. If I had an aspiration for a day and it was sunny or cloudy, it was like, I mean, you can be institutionalized for this kind of stuff. Really. But that's what I felt. That's what I felt. And that's what I believe was the world was communicating to me. The water spoke. Everything was teaching something. Now, Goethe, the German philosopher who you just can't read enough of if you can read it, if you can read it at all, said all life is but a metaphor. And then I was like, oh, of course, that's it. In other words, the design of the universe itself is a metaphor for what's going on behind the scenes. Does that make sense? So, it doesn't mean everything happens, quote, for a reason, as in you deserved it or you didn't deserve it, but it does mean everything's happening inside a design. And that if you open, as E. Cummings said, the ears of your ears and the eyes of your eyes, then you will see things different. The food on your plate, the person sitting beside you. And you know what that's like. I know many of you know what that's like, because that's the moment you start waking up to synchronicity. Like, oh my gosh, I'm wearing blue too. Are we both going to the same event? This is crazy. You're sitting beside me, you're human, you speak English. I can't believe it. It's happening. And sometimes it seems like a little extreme. But what's happening is we're opening ourselves up to another way of being. We're opening ourselves up to another reality, right? So I call it the experience of the mythical inner senses, in the sense that all of our senses start to function at a deeper level in which we are seeing the subtle reality and not the obvious one. Does that make sense? Okay. And remember, you can interrupt with a question. The next experience, and this is sort of chronological actually, so this was now late teens that this was more common, was the experience of the universe as God itself. So notice how there's an interesting progression from spirit is the energy flowing from beyond into the material world, to spirit is that which organizes the material world and speaks through it, to spirit is the material world. See what I'm talking about? Do you see what I'm talking about? And it doesn't matter, you don't have to go through these progressions, and you can have any one or a combination of these experiences. Interestingly, in Hinduism and Buddhism, two traditions that have gone a great distance to articulating states and stages of consciousness, not just Ken Wilber, they have actually articulated all of these things. All the subtle nuances of different dimensions of the awakening awareness. So, I'm not making this stuff up. But I point it out because it's interesting, because I'm only talking about it from first-hand experience because I just think that's more compelling and interesting, as opposed to stand up here and read from my notes, in the 7th Upanishad in the 3rd chapter, it is said, the mind may perceive God as an energy flowing through the world. I'd rather just tell you, and then I saw. Because there might be some transition or transmission in that. So the experience of life as God, the experience of radiant beauty, actually, I think is one of the more accessible superstates. Because what it's about combining a sense of mindfulness, being present, with an open-hearted willingness to appreciate that which you are experiencing. And this is one of the miracles of the construction of our universe, which is that it can be beautiful in any moment. And we've all seen those like horrible images of, let's say, war on Time magazine. But somehow the photographer has captured something in that image that is simultaneously tragic but poetic, because it somehow reveals something deeper. The sadness, the pain, or even the anger at the injustice itself sometimes is that beauty. Because we feel our interconnection. We feel our love for people we don't even know and don't need to know. And that awakening of compassion in tragedy is a powerful evidence of spirit, I believe. And it comes down to simpler things. When you have, all right, let's be honest, who here really likes a cup of coffee in the morning? Hands up. Don't be shy. Okay, even decaf. Shame on you, I do not understand. But do you really let it be your sacrament? Do you let it be as special as it can be? The smell, the colors, the contrast of a dark coffee against white porcelain. The way cream or soy cream or almond milk blends and swirls in like the converging tributaries of the Amazon River. Can you see the universe in your coffee cup? Because it's there, right? It's there with every grape you pick. It's there with every piece of music you listen to. I'll tell you a quick story. I think I just might use all the time. Is that okay? All right. Well, if you want to leave, you're welcome. I don't care. So I was staying with this man, and I shared this at a Sunday service recently, who was a Zen master. But he was such a Zen master that he even refused to be called a Zen master. If you talk to him and even use the word right or wrong in a sentence, he would interrupt you and shut you down. He did not tolerate dualism at all. And he was a big, kind of burly lumberjack of a man. I guess that's like a theme in my teachers. But anyway. And so I remember this day. I think I need to sit down for this. So I remember this day. I had been staying with him for 2 weeks, and the task was to practice, I think the word is non-discursive thinking, is that right? Non-discursive thought, like non-dualistic thought. So I could appreciate things, I could feel things, but the minute I got myself preferring or judging, I was to stop. Think nothing or move on. It's quite a task. And I shared the other day, I'll quickly share this as well. He had me working in his barn, I was raking out the turkey stalls or whatever it was. And he came in and he could see me like deep in thought. And I was probably thinking like, what the hell am I doing here? And he's like, what are you thinking about? And I started to tell him and he's like, stop it. Stop thinking. So this was the task. And it was on and on and on and on. And then one day, this was in Vancouver Island, BC. One day after a long day of work, like hard physical labor, really great for alternate states. It's like my favorite. So I was tired, I sat down, he had books. I sat down with one of his books under a tree, leaned back against the tree, and I'd just been kind of contemplating this whole kind of like went down into this dark hole. It just evaporated. And I had this spacious moment of awareness without thought, emptiness without sleep. And then I heard some kids screaming, and I realized these kids were skinny dipping in the pool nearby. They were young. And I kind of like came out of it, but not quite. And the experience was not the evaporation of the universe. Gary Renard, Disappearance of the Universe, that's a good book. It was what happened when I opened my eyes. Everything was just shining. Maybe you've had one of those moments. Everything. Grass was shining. The house was like this miracle of human ingenuity and creation. And it wasn't just a house, but it was wood and glass. It was trees and sand. You know, everything that went into everything was simultaneously present. And beautiful, so beautiful. And I'll never forget, I went slowly into his living room. Now that I think about it, he passed me, looked at me, didn't say anything. Maybe he thought something was going on and left me alone. And I sat down. I'll never forget Vivaldi was playing. And I remember the way my mind was able to kind of travel around each note and explore the distance between them. No drugs. Just experiencing the absolutely extraordinarily, almost painful beauty of life. Every note, every singing note of the violin, a vibration, possible because of an invisible world. Well, it went on, and of course dinner was really good that night. It was salmon, I remember that. And the point is that of all the things we're going to talk about today, this is definitely one that's more accessible to us. This is my re-entry point. It's not like I'm always walking around blissed out. You know, I have happier moments, more frustrating moments, all that stuff. But the experience of radiant beauty is a gentle, powerful, ever-present way to remember the light that shines behind it all. I'm going to bring it back in. The reason why dreams and visions affected me dramatically was because to dream something before it happens, for me, did not translate into a feeling of self-importance or specialness. What it did was it just showed me the nature of the universe. Do you know what I'm saying? In other words, anything was happening because I was, psychic. I thought it was happening because I was more intrigued by the fact that it was possible at all. Maybe I should put it that way. Like, how is it possible that I had a dream that my dad was a buffalo? This was a good story, some of you heard, short version. A sick buffalo. And that I was a young buffalo beside him, watching him helplessly as he stormed around the den of his home. And then later that day, found out that he had lung and brain cancer. And then 9 months later, he died in that same room. Like, that dream prepared me for that. Or what about when this was another crazy thing, when I was 14, I was in Hawaii. This is a long story. I'm trying to make it short, but this is an awesome story. I was in Hawaii, and I was obviously right into all this stuff. And I went to it was like the Sheraton or the Marriott. It was one of those, whatever, mainstream hotels. And my parents were checking in. And I went over to the concierge desk. Like, imagine this little white Jewish kid from Canada, Hawaii, Kauai. Parents are checking in. And I go to the concierge and say, "Excuse me, is there a place where I can learn about traditional Hawaiian spirituality?" And the guy at the desk kind of pushes his seat back and he's like, hang on a second, kid. And he goes in the back, and then this very, once again, large stature person comes out, a Hawaiian woman, with huge glasses and perched on her nose, and she looks at me. She's like, "Are you the one?" And I was like, so she says, "Come with me." And we walk like out of the building, down the street. I didn't even tell my parents. They were used to me being insane by now. And she says, like, "Why do you want to know?" And I told her, well, I just told her the truth. I mean, I didn't know enough to be embarrassed then. So I was like, well, I'm on a spiritual journey and I'm trying to figure all this stuff out. And I keep seeing these things. She was like, all right, come and see me tomorrow in the library at 1 o'clock. Oh, okay, yes. So I went. Yeah, too bad. This is such a good story. Anyway, she's making Hawaiian leis. And she has me help. That's where, thread the flowers to make the necklace. And she starts talking to me about energy. Do you see energy? I don't know what you're talking about. This is like real Jedi stuff. She's like, can you feel it? Do you see it? I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about, but this is cool. So she led me in my first guided visualization. She had me picturing energy and so on and so forth. Anyway, there was all kinds of wild stuff that happened with this woman over the next 12 days. Things that I still don't even believe myself. Fortunately, my parents were around and actually saw some of it happen. We were doing old school Carlos Castaneda, let's go to the rainforest where it's always raining and part the clouds. I mean, it was wild. But the coolest thing that happened, the most impactful thing that happened, was she sent me on this walk. She said, she gave me a little map, she drew it on a napkin. You're going to have to walk on some private property along the beach, but don't worry, no one will see you. And then you'll see this pathway, and then you'll go down this path. Is this interesting? Okay. So, go down the path and just kind of like, be aware. See if you feel it. So I went, and as I started walking on the path, I remember I felt this heat, like this burning, and I thought I had indigestion. And then it kind of went away, and then I went a little further, and it happened again. It happened 3 times. And the third time I stopped and I closed my eyes, and I heard this noise. Like deep, powerful noise. And I thought, oh crap, I'm in trouble now. My parents were nowhere nearby. I was 14 years old. I was alone. I was on private property. I knew what was going on, and the earth itself was shaking beneath my feet. Swear to God. And I opened my eyes, and suddenly I realized I was standing by this cliff, a high rock wall, and it was just a tree that was with the wind blowing away and then coming back against it. And the earth was shaking because the roots of the tree were under my feet. So it wasn't anything magical. Or was it? So, okay. And then I saw it. And she said, you'll know it when you see it. And just ask permission before you go any further. And there it was, at the base of the tree. I mean, this sounds, I can't even believe now I'm thinking about it. Like, this is really awesome. There was a little door, like a little crack in the wall, a cave, like this high. And I thought, I am supposed to go in there. And so I got down and I asked permission from everything in the universe I could think of. I mean, Jesus, Buddha, angels, Allah, whoever's out there. This is freaking me out, but I'm going in. And it was dark, and I started crawling. And I started crawling, and eventually out of the dark there was a little light. And finally I came through the other side. And I came to an arena inside this giant rock. A perfect circle of high rock walls with an enormous tree. Like a banyan tree, but I don't think they have banyan trees in Hawaii, do they? something that looked like a banyan tree, like really grand, with tendrils hanging down, standing in the middle, kind of like, what was that movie? Avatar? Remember the big tree? Anyway. And I remember having this extraordinary moment, the tree in the middle of this great circle. Tree, a single tree in the middle of this great hoop. I couldn't get the imprint of this symbolism out of my head. A single tree in this great circle. And I started to walk around, and then I imagined, so this is like, was a vision, is imagination. I imagined there was a little further indentation in one of the walls, like a big wide mouth. And I imagined a group of people there. Like I couldn't see them, but I kind of saw them. Do you know what I mean? Like I imagined seeing them. I mean, I knew they weren't there. Anyway, to accelerate this story, I went back and I told her. I told her about the burning, and she's like, those are the guardians. And then I told her about the thumping, and then I told her about going in. And she told me that this was a place hundreds of years ago where a tribe of Hawaiian people had taken refuge to hide from the invading Europeans. And that they had lived there for a long time, and that there was a local story about this small band of people that apparently I had just seen. But this isn't the cool part. The cool part is that I met we just don't have time for all this. I met a woman by accident at a bookstore. Her name was Smoky Rain. If anyone knows Smoky Rain, please connect us. She was from Michigan. I don't know how she figured out I was a trippy little dude, but she did. And she told me, you need to do two things when you go home. You need to read a book called Black Elk Speaks, and you need to look for a man named, can't remember his name exactly, but something like Alvin Manny Patopoulos. Super Greek. And she said, but he's not Greek. I don't know how he got that name. He's a native elder on the Hobbema Reservation in Alberta, Canada. Well, let's fast forward the story a little bit. I was in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, and there was this traditional gathering of culture and dance and teachings, and I decided I would just go. My parents dropped me off, and I walked around. It was like totally native scene, and I didn't know what I was doing there. And all of a sudden I thought, that guy, I'm going to see if someone knows Alvin Manny Patopoulos. So I looked around, and there was a guy standing by one of the billboards with the events of the day, and I went over to him and I said, excuse me, I've never been to something like this before, but someone told me that I should look for a man named Alvin Manny Patopoulos. And he looked at me for a long time. You know what he said? He said, I am he. How did you find me? I said, I don't know, this is crazy. Bookstore in Hawaii, okay, Smoky Rain. Anyway, well, Alvin said, stay on the path, you're doing good, kid, blah, 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 blah. And he mentioned the name of a man who later came back to me. Two more quick pieces of the story, and we'll move on from this section. When I read Black Elk Speaks, there's a significant image that recurs in there of the sacred hoop with the tree of life standing at the center of it. And I knew I'd seen it. And I knew I felt it. And I knew that I knew what I was looking at it when I was looking at it, even though I didn't know what it was. And then years later, I met the man that Alvin mentioned, who then became my adoptive father, the man I showed you the picture of. And one day, after a decade, under his care and calling him Dad, more than a decade, probably 12 years later, he asked me if I would help him to start a new Sundance, a ceremony that happens, a great circle, and a tree that stands at the center of it. And I'll never forget that first day in that ceremony, thinking almost 20 years ago, I saw this in Hawaii, a circle with a sacred tree standing in the center. And here it's come to life. So I could go on and on with this, but I think you get the idea. That when you have these kinds of things that cross time and space and culture and people, it's not like, I think I dreamt that I was going to have a burrito today. And I'm having a burrito. I mean, this is hard stuff to make up. Question?
It's probably a dumb question because you're so personable, but what was it like growing up with other children?
Oh, the question is, what was it like growing up with other children?
Since you don't seem to
Yeah.
have a normal kid.
No, the truth is I felt super isolated a lot of the time. And I spent a lot of time alone. I was fortunate, I went to a school that had very beautiful property. So once I was really into this stuff, so when I was 13, I was in the 8th grade. So I started skipping a lot of class and reading Joseph Campbell and Ellerby by the river and writing poetry and just getting really bad marks. And my only real close friend for a long time was just like a quirky young guy who was also just really interested in philosophy. And it's interesting because I'm only saying this to answer your question, not to impress anyone. I was a popular kid. Like, kids liked me. I wasn't weird because of this. That's my point. So I was on student, they voted me to be like the student council rep and all that. But it was always really weird. It was weird to me why anyone related to me, because I didn't relate to them. It was weird that anyone thought I was likable. And I think I still carry that to some degree, just this feeling of weirdness and the implicit sense that something about me is unacceptable, which is partly why pirates help me. But on the other hand, I think that we all feel that a little bit. I think we all feel a little bit unacceptable. But yeah, I still have my journals from when I was 14, 15, 16. And I have lots of writing like, why did you leave me here? Writing to the spiritual universe like, this is a terrible joke because I think I'm in the wrong dimension. This is my feeling. So yeah, it was weird for sure. Thank you. Thank you for highlighting that. Formless awareness. Any other interjections or questions before we dive into the formless? No? Okay. I'm actually not going to spend a ton of time on this, even though in some ways this is said to be sort of the penultimate spiritual encounter. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it only because it is something that actually a lot of mystics talk about. It is in the first chapter of Return to the Sacred. It is the basis of most non-dual teaching. So I'm going to just give you a quick snapshot, but we're going to move on to some other cool stuff, or stuff that I think is cool. So the experience of formless awareness, maybe just to give you a little bit of the story, because the stories are sometimes more funny and very interesting than the actual experiences. So here I was. Remember I told you I would get back to dedicated, God's going to talk to me, I'm going to keep going at this until this actually happens. Do you remember that moment of madness? So this continued. When I was 18, I decided I wasn't going to go on to university. I was going to take a year off, and I had an old Subaru that I was driving. I was going to pack up some camping gear and go to the western states and just immerse myself in wilderness and read and study and meditate until God literally told me what was going on. And I remember, I was so determined I didn't take any music because I didn't want to pollute my mind. I wasn't going to listen to the radio. And so I was just going to drive and meditate and pray and pray and pray. And I left Manitoba, dropped down into North Dakota, and started driving west towards Montana. And I'm going to tell you something. After 5 hours driving through North Dakota, my spirit was broken. And I pulled over and, oh, I need some music! And I started going to the So all kinds of stuff happened on this adventure, but there was one day where I had been traveling for a few months, and I had some good moments, but it didn't happen. So I was going to go far as I could into the wilderness. And there's a funny story about two drunk prospectors who told me where to go, but that's also in the book. And I ended up way in this high Sierra Nevada. You guys know Sierra Nevadas. Anyone ever heard of Hot Springs? Is that possible? Maybe. Anyway, I went up way up there and further. It was so way up there and further that you had to close your rear view mirrors, because at a certain point it was just like a cart path. And then, you kept going. So I was going to fast, right? That's what they had in the books. I've been reading all about it. And I was just going to sit out there on a blanket until either I died or I got an answer, right? That was my determination. Well, thank God the following happened. The night before, while I was preparing myself, I went to the top of a beautiful bald rock, and I sat down on this beautiful green blanket I still have. It's in my office at home, our office at home. And I sat into the full moon, which we still have, last night. And I was just praying, like, please let this happen, and I'd rather not die in the process. But I'm going to do this, so please, please, please. And I was working with it was my own little ritual and ceremony, right? So I was praying to the directions and talking to the moon, and all of a sudden the moon started to flicker, like a light bulb that was going to go out. And I guess I had glasses at the time, and kind of like, put my glasses on. And I continued praying and staring at the moon, and all of a sudden the dark blue of sky, and if you want, you can close your eyes and try to picture this with me, but you imagine you're on a rock high on a mountain on a warm night, and you're staring at a beautiful white moon in the sky, and the sky around is that beautiful dark navy blue, and the silhouette of pine trees in your peripheral vision. And then all of a sudden the pine trees just melted into the night sky. And then the stars dissolved into the dark blue sea. And then the moon vanished. My eyes were open. But the world itself was evaporating around me. Until the last thing I remembered was that I was perceiving the vanishing universe until I myself was consumed by the darkness. I myself dissolved into the same darkness. And in that moment, which could have been 5 minutes or an hour, I don't know, there was just an undifferentiated unity. And there was no thinking about it, because there was no me to think. It was just, as they say, isness, emptiness with awareness, and yet no awareness of anything. The absolute, pure opposite of subject-object perception. Which in the moment was, of course, something I couldn't describe, something I didn't even know was happening because there was no one to know what was happening. And then after a short time, I remember feeling my tongue on my teeth. And I was startled because the reality that I had entered was so real and so true that it felt like that was really the only reality. The only true reality. And then as my body materialized, to my surprise and dismay, this body seemed the foreign encounter. And that vast, formless world of spirit was clearly the truth. And I won't even say I was stunned, because it was so peaceful, more than powerful, as I just quietly went back to my tent and slept. And when I woke up in the morning, good golly, the stream of consciousness, insights, feelings, understandings, unbelievable. And of course, I figured that was enough. I could go back down from the mountain. And I did. But that was very, very significant. And very different than all the previous. Although I don't know that I need to necessarily tell big stories. So, the first time I ever encountered a major, super disclosure, this is on camera, I don't think we're going to post this on YouTube, I don't know. My mom wouldn't care, but maybe some of you don't want people to know. So when I was in my 20s, I went on an expedition to the Amazon with a medical team to take traditional healers and modern Western doctors to remote communities that had lost their medicine. And their kids were literally dying of things that they had the cures for right under their homes, their huts. But because they'd been told that traditional medicine was of the devil, they had no doctors anymore. But they were days away from the nearest clinic. So kids were dying of diarrhea all the time. And there were plants that you could just boil and drink that would cure it right literally below their steps. So my job was to go as a liaison for the traditional people that were on the trip, healers from other communities that were coming to restore the faith, and then there were doctors and nurses and dentists. This is another big story, but I'm going to condense this one. Our first day, we went to Quitos, the river town, not Quitos in Ecuador, but Iquitos. And we were taken about an hour into the jungle. So you have to fly into Quitos and then go anywhere by car or plane, or by boat or plane. So we went by, no, there were cars there. So we went by a truck deep into the jungle. You couldn't get there by car, but once you were there were cars. I don't know how that happened. But anyway, so we went an hour into the jungle, and we were in this little cultural immersion center where these old shamans were just teaching people about how to behave when you go to the villages. Like, don't touch this, and don't say that, and don't eat these things, and this is what we believe. And that night they invited us to participate in an ayahuasca ceremony. Now, some of you have heard of this. It's traditional plant medicine with two different plants, typically chacruna and ayahuasca, and they're combined for a powerful spiritual psychedelic effect. We were not allowed to participate because we were part of this expedition, and that kind of goes against all the liability forms that you sign. So we were allowed to observe, but not partake. Now, I had been involved with Native communities at this point in my life quite a bit. That's why I was going as a liaison, and I've been in many curious nighttime ceremonies. And so there we were in this kind of no wall, thatched, under a thatched roof in the dark. And these three old men were smoking these huge black tobacco cigarettes and drinking the ayahuasca medicine. And I simply made a commitment to be in the ceremony through prayer and through meditation. And I believed that I could join them without some potion. And so, slowly, one by one, the other members of our group left the circle because it was late and all they were doing was sitting in the dark, swatting mosquitoes, looking at a couple of guys getting stoned, right? Like, that's kind of what they were thinking. But I knew there was something more going on, or I believed there was something more going on. And so I stayed, and I listened for hours into the night as they sang the incredibly beautiful songs, played the rattles. And then at one point, after I'd been the only one there for quite some time, they sort of stopped, and it got quiet, and they were talking back and forth to each other. And one of them turns on a flashlight, and then they spot me there, and then they all start laughing. And then the next morning, we're all getting ready to leave, and one of them comes out, the one who could speak English, and he said, "We want to make this ceremony with you. Will you come back?" So I will tell you, I went back. And you have to remember, this is a young man who had actually never even been drunk in his life, not even tipsy. And it was a 6-day process they invited me into. It started with fasting, changing my diet, ritual cleansings by this river. There was a funny moment where they had taken me into the jungle and covered me in clay and then left me sitting on a stump to dry in the heat, and then they left. And I turned into a statue, like probably naked or half naked or mostly. They're coming back, they're taking my wallet, going through my stuff. And they came back and rubbed it off. It was fantastic spa treatment, and I got washed down with flower water. And then we did the actual ceremony 4 times over the next 5 nights. And that is a whole 2-hour conversation. But I will say that on the first time, not much happened. And they explained to me that medicine knows what it's doing. The first time it's going to come and clarify, purify you, and prepare you for the next time. Because it's not a drug, it's a spirit. A spirit that works through a plant. Do you understand? Yes. And this spirit, sure enough, came the first time. And sure enough, let's just say there was a lot of cleansing going on over the next 24 hours, and I mean physically. Every way you can imagine. The third time we did the ceremony, and you got to remember, willingness, right? I mean, imagine after the first time, and you spend like hours, pardon me for the coarseness, but vomiting and pooping your brains out, like literally pooping your brains out so they have to get put back in later. I mean, do you think you want to go back and do that again? And I was like, yeah! It's gotta get better, right? The third time, I mean, there was so much that happened. And it really, this was maybe my first moment where I did think, like maybe I am missing something, because I was seeing and feeling and going places that previously just happened by chance. And this was now like, wow, I can sign up and this just happens. But there was a particular moment that I want to describe briefly that has recurred since without ayahuasca, but I will be honest and say that was more potent. And it was the experience of feeling all things dissolving not into the vast void and emptiness of source, but it was, the only way I could describe it, it was the experiencing visually and sensationally of the living energy universe. So everything physical just turned into a sea of energy. Every tree, every being, breath, air, it was all just colorful, moving, interacting, intelligent energy. And I'll never forget one of the most poignant awarenesses I had, because in this moment I was still aware of me. I was watching, feeling this as an energy being, but in the energy. And I was suddenly like, oh, duh, that's how miracles happen. That's why we can know things at a distance. That's why time is immaterial. Because in the third dimension, that piano looks incredibly difficult to move. But in the energetic dimension, it's just energy. I mean, it's It's not an idea. It's clearly, palpably energy, as is the space between me and you, as is the space between you and I, as is even our thoughts. A thought in that dimension is as energetically real as a chair. And so why not, with the right awareness, can you not move the energy of the thought to affect the energy of the chair, or the person, or the past, or the future? Astonishing. One of the other fun things that happens in this dimension, and this came later, is the sense of being able to travel through macro and micro dimensions. And some of you may have also experienced that. So you not only enter the energy, but you can feel yourself almost like on a roller coaster going through the blood veins, and then into the capillaries, and then into the lungs, and then out as breath. I mean, it's awesome. I don't really know how to make that happen all the time, though. Otherwise, I'd probably never leave home. Anyway, what's significant about this, though, is, and why I share it, is because it not only felt real, but it corroborates and matches the experience of many people who have seen and felt the energy universe. Energy healers, mediums, mystics, psychics, physicists will all talk about this dimension as something they're very familiar with. So, last few. One experience that was also truly transformative, and I've said I'll make them short before, and maybe they weren't that short, but this one I can keep short. It moves along the continuum of perceiving divinity, first flowing through the world, then being a radiant energy behind the world, then being the world itself, and then the movement of identity into that. That's what this moment is about. So this is not an experience of yourself as the void. This is yourself as the universe, in which life exists inside you. And the extraordinary result of this kind of a feeling is that the world, I would say, becomes more than just an extension of you. It feels like your own child. I mean, that's the only way analogy I have. And I know not everyone has children, that's fine, but you get the idea, is that there is such an implicit love for creation and all that is manifest when we realize our shared identity with the divine, that the world becomes our responsibility. And everyone in it feels like more than family, like our blood, like our flesh. And we may not like them all, but it becomes permanently impossible not to love them all, and to not be able to summon a loving feeling with reasonable ease. Because it's our nature, it's our truth. It's not, again, the story is not about someone who is experiencing something special. It's about someone who is just seeing things the way they are. And some of you have been there. Some of you have read it. Some of you have thought it or felt it. But the bottom line is that this truth, this feeling, leads to a very different world. Imagine if even a small percent of our planet truly felt that the world was its blood, its responsibility. What if our politicians felt that way? You know, what if our business leaders felt that way? This is not esoteric. This is actually the most critical insight we can pursue to know that this universe is our responsibility, not from a place of intellectual understanding, but from a place of implicit shared identity. I wasn't sure if I was going to include this one, but I couldn't help, because it just, 8 would have been a good number, because 8's like that, infinity, you know. But I wanted to include this one. We're going to finish with 2 that are, I don't know what you're supposed to do with this, but I'm going to share it, because for me personally, this is awesome stuff. There is a spiritual encounter which I would simply call the bliss realm, or the love realm. If you've ever been there, and some of you have, that is the most awesome place in the universe. Forget formless awareness. And it's a place where you simply, I guess, move into the feeling of the absolute limitless abundance of love. And when you're in that moment, all you can do is laugh and smile and cry, because it feels like your heart is being blown open again and again and again and again, and it just like won't stop. And just when you think it's tearing you apart, you want it to continue. And it affirms something that we intellectually hope for, that love is the nature of our universe, that love is abundant, that the emotional encounter with God is love. And all I can say is, if you pursue the experience, if you're blessed with the experience, then it ceases to be an idea. And it simply exists as a fundamental truth. The last one, and I dare say we're doing good for time. The last one is the freakiest, weirdest, hardest thing for me to share, but I want to share it because I don't think people talk about it enough, and I don't know what you're supposed to do with this in particular. Hopefully the other ones were all obviously connected to visions of our reality and what people believe and teach, and why the world's spiritual teachers share such common things, because they are all seeing the same stuff. They're all having the same experiences, and they're just using different language, as you know, to get there. But it's not because of the archetypes of the brain. It's not because of the archetypes of psychology. It's because this energetic universe of consciousness is real. And we can perceive it while in the human body. Okay, so this used to say group, being, consciousness, light, council, cloud, thingy. But I took the word thingy out because I thought maybe that was just too trite. But there is an experience that, again, some of you may have had, but many of you have heard of and have talked about, that reminds us or shows us that consciousness exists in multiple dimensions. Self-aware consciousness exists in multiple dimensions. And the options aren't just me, the individual, me, the universe, and me, the divine. That's what we generally work with. But I'm just going to affirm there's a whole lot of other weird stuff going on. And in some moments, and for some reason this has been more dominant in my recent years of experience, and I never wanted it, but I'm sure it's real. There is a moment in which, I'll just speak personally, I am able to perceive my own awareness independent of my human existence, not united with the divine, but in a cloud-like, in a light cloud of shared consciousness with other beings. It's a distinct group. The wild part about this, because that just sounds a little weird, right? But if you go online, if you Google Google metaphysics and you Google, channels and all this stuff, almost every person who I've ever heard channel refers to the fact that whatever they're channeling exists in this dimension. Not 100%, but shockingly common. That what I'm bringing in is actually not an individual, but an individual, and they'll use the expression, it's part of a council. You ever heard about the councils, anyone? Come on, you're in a metaphysical meetup. Anyone heard of the council? You know about the council. When you experience the council directly, or become a member, there's no individual. It's just a we consciousness. And what you remember in the we consciousness is that we are never a we. Meaning, we are never a me, pardon me. We, any one of us. Doug actually said it beautifully. There is no consciousness but group consciousness. And the mind can experience successive, internesting, interlocking groups of consciousness. But there is no true individual consciousness. And that's phenomenal because most of us spend our lives dwelling on our individualism, dwelling on our separateness, and suffering because of it. And I dare say we suffer the more individualistic we become. Why? Because we are the furthest from the truth. When we believe we are separate. And thank God, that's a painful experience. Otherwise, we just might get comfortable. Judging others, trying to control others, trying to be right, trying to be beautiful, trying to be better. The pain of the human experience is a powerful reminder that we are not what we've come to believe. It's just a side effect of being in an energy-dense realm that is ultimately designed to help us embrace and encounter multiple dimensions of awareness so that we may move energy in a way that no other dimension can. Because if you ask me, Jonathan, which dimension is the most important for changing the world, I'd say this one. The one where I get sad, the one where I get angry, the one where I get hungry. This is the most important dimension for changing the world because this is the dimension where praying for a tree to grow doesn't take decades. I can go to the store and buy seed and pull aside the dirt and put the seed in the ground and cover it up in water. I don't have to pray for decades to know what love is. I can look someone in the eye and feel, I can hold. This is the dimension of extraordinary power and density. But it's so dense, the mind becomes overwhelmed. And so we come to our conclusions. What we're affirming is that this, whatever we want to call third dimension life, is just a sliver of our reality. And then we are all heir to the experience of a greater mind, of a greater heart, of a greater being. We're not all going to experience the same stuff. You're not going to experience stuff like me. I'm not going to experience stuff like you. Some of you have had experiences that if you told me, I'd say, oh my gosh, that's so cool. I wish I could have experienced that. The point is that just as we say, have you been to China? Have you been to Mexico? Have you been to Peru? Our universe is diverse and full and rich. And the more we travel in the world beyond this, the more peace we encounter, the more love we feel, and the more capable of manifesting change and truly loving and embracing the human existence we are. Isn't that funny? The more we go into these dimensions, I do believe, the more we can enjoy that cup of coffee, that laugh time with your dog, the light coming in from the window outside. We get to be really human. We get to be superhuman. The conclusion is that there's only one thing. You can call it God, you can call it Spirit, but only God is real. That is the successive message of each encounter, each altered state. There's only one thing. Only one thing. And we experience it in our consciousness. We experience it through these extraordinary states. But you have to take the journey. You have to be willing to explore, to try. Because spirituality is not what you think. Literally. This is not a thought process. It's not a degree. It's not a formula. And I am finishing with a simple message, and the whole reason why we spend all this time talking about spiritual experiences, which is that it's nice and encouraging for any teacher to tell you that you can grow in your spirit through some kind of study. But the bottom line is, awakening happens experience by experience, not thought by thought, not self-fulfillment by self-fulfillment. It comes from the passionate pursuit of directly perceiving the reality that we are and that we come from. So that's our time. And I do want to see quickly if there's any questions, but I'm guessing you want to do the draw for names.
Yes, and for those who don't win when you're selling them,
Oh, well, so the book that we offered is the most recent book. So that's what we promoted. So you will get a free copy of my most recent book. But there are several, and the book that I referred to was actually my first book. So that's the other, the most recent book is not here, but it's like super cheap. You can buy it on Amazon. Okay, 2 names. Kim Wall. Kim Wall. I can't know. And Cynthia Collins Arsenal. Okay. All right, so when this is all said and done, we have books for you. Yeah, thank you. So, very quickly, before we go, is there any final last question? Just something that was really burning? I'm going to hang out for a few minutes if you want to ask. Nothing burning. So let's take 30 seconds and close together so we don't just let out. I'm going to invite you to close your eyes. I'm going to invite you to take a deep breath. And I am going to invite you to contemplate for a moment that you are like an ice cube bobbing in the middle of a vast, vast ocean. And that as solid as you may feel, and as familiar as you are with the territory around you, you are a part of something infinitely beyond your grasp, infinitely beautiful, infinitely mysterious, infinitely extraordinary. And that if you make yourself available, there are moments where you can simply melt into that great sea. And we give thanks for this journey of consciousness, for another day on this human journey to love, to learn, to laugh. And we pray for the humility and courage to go beyond what we know and to surrender the extraordinary truth of spirit that lies waiting for us all. Amen. Thank you. And we have Sunday services at 8:30.